other one. Do I know how to stream? Do I know how to speak? I don't know. But yeah, this is called Meaning Without Gricean Intentions. This is in Analysis. It's forthcoming. And yeah, here we go. So. Yeah, so, thank you, Unreal, for posting. Yeah, there's a whole article on Grice in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Lumpy says, you see, back in the day when your Vipers guy who was getting old, you just abandoned a field. Now you have to get it meds. Yeah. People, you're expected to, spend a lot of money on pets. I mean, rightly so, but here we go. Okay. So, yeah, Paul Grice or whatever it is. Gricean theories analyze meaning in terms of certain complex intentions on the part of the speaker. There are disagreements about the details among Griceans, but what is common to all is that for the speaker to mean something, they are supposed to intend to produce certain effects on the addressee, and to have that intention recognized by the addressee. A Gricean analysis of particular kinds of speech acts is then built on top of this analysis of meaning. For example, according to the Gricean, to ask something might require intending to elicit some information from the addressee, and to have that intention recognized by the addressee, in part on the basis of meaning something by a particular utterance, which in turn is analyzed as above. Yeah, so I say something, it's supposed to get you to do something. That's how it goes. That's it. Though they have fallen under attack from many fronts, Gricean theories of meaning are still very prominent, with several recent proponents, in addition to the more classical ones. Yeah, so I mean, for anyone who does not know philosophy of language, Grice is like a titan, and there are Griceans who do this. And banned. Yeah. Okay. In this paper, by drawing an analogy with cases widely discussed in action theory, we develop a novel challenge against Gricean theories of meaning, arguing that there is a class of cases where the speaker means something and performs certain speech acts, but has neither of the intentions mentioned above, that is, does not intend to produce those particular effects on the addressee, and does not want their intentions to be recognized by the addressee. If this is right, we will have proved one more reason to think that meaning does not need Gricean intentions. Yep. Exactly. Ban the bots and ban the fucking spammers. Get them out. All right. So this is sounds like an example. The cunning citizen. There are two rigidly separate castes, each with its own language, one unrelated to the other. One caste, the citizens, speak language C. The other caste, the priests, speak language P. Did my return to work go okay? Yes. I had a shit ton of work at the beginning of this week, but I just sort of ground myself down, got most all of it done already. So I'm basically back to just like normal work. So yeah, it went fine. One of my friends at work was just like laughing at me. He's like, "Oh, you just decided you're going to go across town. You're not coming to work." I was like, "That's right." It's like, yeah. How do I get one of those? I want Globusian theories. Yeah, you have to get followers. And then then it's like the Globusians say this and the Griceans say that. So it's like, yeah, you have to somehow get followers. That's what it really is. So you have to have a Humean theory, because Humean people like that. It's not yeah, thank you, Lumpy. It's not so easy to gain followers. Like Gricean, there's actually arguments about the proper way to refer to people who follow Quine. So are they Quinian? Quininian? Quinean? Exactly what do you do? Because that's actually when it ends in IN, the quine, the IN sound. But yeah. But I like Globusian. Globusian is a medical term, thank you. I mean, there's other things we would say if we were in Aris's chat. There's a bunch of Quiners. Oh, that's good. That's good, Unreal. Okay, so we've got the citizens who speak language C and the priests who speak language P, and they don't speak to each other. Right, Lumpy says. And, I mean, if someone puts it in chat, I will not ban them, I promise. Frank says, this is more complicated than it needs to be. I can just directly ask you to say shibboleth, and you don't know what I'm asking. it does exactly the same thing. We're not there yet, Frank. We'll find out what these people's point is. This, you may be right, but I don't know what they're going to claim yet. I mean, this is just, this is just not here nor there at the moment. I don't know what they're talking about yet. So it is rigidly enforced that citizens and priests do not speak one another's languages. One cunning citizen plans to rob a monastery where both priests and citizens live. The latter work there as caretakers. In order to disguise himself more effectively, our citizen secretly learns P in addition to C. So when it is dark, he steals some of the priest's gold, planning to then escape through the underground. However, in the darkness, he gets lost. From a distance, somebody is approaching, but there is no way to tell if it's a priest or a citizen, and he has to quickly figure out where the entrance of the underground is, since his escape vehicle leaves at the other end in 2 minutes. Knowing that it might be his only chance to get directions and it is too dark for the approaching person to figure out that he is a citizen rather than a priest, the cunning citizen thinks to himself, both the library and the church are close to the entrance of the underground, and the same sequence of sound happen to mean 2 different questions in P and in C. Where is access to the library, and in what direction is the chapel? If the person approaching is a citizen, they will only interpret my question in C, since they cannot know P, and if it is a priest, they will only interpret the question in P. Either way, I will get directions to the underground. So he makes those sounds. Okay, this is really complicated. You were right, Frank. I did not know. Maybe you had read ahead. It has gotten really complicated, but like whatever. So they're saying a certain sequence of noises that mean 2 different questions that have 2 different answers. And so depending on which answer they get, they'll know where they are. Yeah. Lumpy says, my favorite so far is Cthulhu Lady promised to let you stare into the abyss sea. Ah, yes. That's not bad. I would like that. Already this is ridiculous. Yes, ridiculous. I can't speak today. Lost my ability to read and to think and speak. Okay. Authors claim that if the person the cunning citizen is addressing as a priest but not a citizen, they will correctly take him to have asked, and he will have asked them where the access to the library is. Furthermore, he will have meant what we in English would mean when we ask where is access to the library. This is in spite of the fact that he did not have the intention to ask that very question in particular, since either one will have worked for his purpose, and since he did not know what languages his addressee was speaking. I mean, there's a way to interpret this where he had 2 intentions. He was intending to ask a citizen where the library was, and the priest where, like, whatever the monastery was. So they're saying he's doing neither. You could also interpret this as both. Why is it one rather than the other? Why can't you intend to do multiple things at once? I can intend to do multiple things at once. Like, I can talk to you and like also like do like look at the camera and like, you know, think about other things. I can do multiple things at once. Like, I could go flip my neighbor the bird. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm putting my finger up and flipping the neighbor a bird, and I'm also telling you about it, which are 2 different things. So it's like, it could be a both. And the fact that they're not saying that right here is worrisome. But like, you know, okay, maybe there's another way they could like split this. But I don't know the Gricean theory enough to say that maybe Grice needs a particular intention to be used for it to like work for the Gricean, for his theory. So maybe it's fine, and maybe it wouldn't matter. These sorts of cases raise a problem for Gricean theories of meaning and of speech acts, which require that the speaker have a specific... Yeah, this is the thing. This is exactly it. The Gricean theories have a specific communicative intention about specific content, one that the audience needs to recognize for the illocutionary act to be successful. So Grice is they're getting Grice at being overly specific because you can do 2 things at once. So they were saying neither, but that's fine because it doesn't work for either, neither, or both. So it's okay. I mean, it's not good, but it works either way. Authors argue that some of the simpler Gricean responses to our cases face significant problems, and we discuss in what ways our challenge differs from other challenges leveled against Gricean theories of meaning in the literature. Finally, we argue that some possible revisions will not fully overcome the problem without some non-trivial costs. Okay, so now they're just going to go into all the details. Gricean theories of meaning. The part of the Gricean theory of language that we are concerned with comes in two stages. It involves the theory of meaning as well as the theory of illocutionary acts. The theory of meaning is foundational, with the theory of speech acts built on top of it, so any problems for the former is a problem for the latter. But we think it useful to go through both because intuitions may be less clear about meaning, a somewhat technical notion, and clearer about asking, a fairly common sense notion. We believe that cases such as cunning citizen present a challenge to both parts, which is hardly surprising since they're supposed to work together. All right, and so if anyone doesn't know what a speech act is, you can do things by speaking. So the classic example is when you get married, you say, I do, and by saying I do, that's how you get married. Or the priest says, I now pronounce you married. And that act of the priest saying, I now pronounce you married, makes you married in the eyes of the church or the state or whatever. So that is what a speech act is. You do something by saying certain words, and in saying those words, you've done something else over and above just saying the words. Here's a classic formulation of Grice's theory of meaning. Quote, by uttering X, you meant something, end quote. Oh, that's a quote, is true if and only if for some audience A, you uttered X intending A to 1, to produce some particular response R, and 2, A to recognize that you intends to 1, so you did something and you intended to do something, and 3, A recognition that you intends to do that one thing to function as part of a reason for 1. So yeah, you said I now pronounce you married because you wanted to pronounce them married. That was your intention to make them married. So yeah. A crucial feature of this formulation, and others similar to it, is that in order to mean something, one needs to intend to produce a particular response, and for the audience to recognize the intention. Yeah, so the state has to recognize when you say, I pronounce you married, that you are now married. That's the audience in some sense. The theory of illocutionary acts is built on top of the theory of meaning, since the speaker must mean something in order to ask, assert, or promise. Here is a representative Gricean analysis of asking a WH question, which entails the requirement that the speaker mean something in order to ask a question. What is the lesson topic of today? So we're talking about speech acts, J-Lo. When we are talking about speech acts, we're talking about, when you say something, you can do more over and above what you said. Like when a priest says, I pronounce you married, then you are now married in the eyes of the state. They didn't just say you were married, they made you married in the eyes of the government. And so these people are arguing some details about that. So I'm not exactly sure where they're going with it, but we are going to find out. Because this is what I do when I'm back, not out in my cousin's backyard. I read other stuff people do, right? And then I try to explain it. So let me know if you have any questions. But we're talking about, when you say something, you tend to do more than you just, it's more complicated than you just saying something. Other things happen, Okay. So this is a quote. So someone makes sense. It does make sense. The devil's in the details as always, Yeah. Very quick, some words on what I missed should know to follow. Okay. So basically, hey, Blob. Again, we're talking about speech act theory, and they're claiming that the main person who invented this, Grice, you need to be very, very specific about what you mean. They're saying that can be undermined. They're going to try to undermine it. I'm not exactly sure what their theory is that they're going to say, but they're trying to undermine the theory that you need to have something very specific in mind when you say something. So, yeah. Lumpy says, today I listened to a chemistry lecture where the guy explained how a fatty acid derivative was mild painkiller and how they spent 2 years optimizing its production and then it failed in clinical trials because the effect was too mild. Oh, that's sad. He ended on, the dogs loved it. We were basically feeding them butter and making you feel good. Placebo is great, That's funny, though. Too bad, That's how a lot of research is. It's like it works a little bit and then you try to boost it, but if you don't get anywhere, it happens. It's disappointing though. 2 years. Yeah. 2 years. Yeah, I mean, I've worked for years on some of my writing stuff, and does it get published? No. It just goes in the fucking nothing. 2 years, 20 people, yeah. Yeah, no problem, Blob. As always, feel free to ask questions. This is complicated philosophy of language, so it gets a little thorny at times. Yeah. Well, imagine if it had worked and then their investment may have paid off, Lumpy. Like 2 years, 20 people, and imagine they had a new painkiller on their hands. It would have been like really good. So, okay, so someone asked a WH question, like what, who, where. Is F, doing something F, in uttering the words, if and only if they utter the words, intending to, 1, produce thereby in the audience an intention to inform S that this thing is happening, that there is an F of delta. So yeah, you're trying to get someone to understand some meaning there. All right. Second, A is to recognize the intention to do that thing. So when you say I intend to, when I pronounce you married, you realize that I'm married. And then there's a response that partially on the basis of recognition of 1 and the recognition of desire to know what. Oh yeah, so I'm sorry. This is like if I ask you a question, you want to know what the answer is. So I ask you something, you understand that I want a response from you. That's all that we're saying here. Okay? Yeah. That's it. So when I ask a question, it is to elicit a response. I'm not just saying I want to know it. I'm saying when I say it to you, I want you to tell me the answer. So that's what's going on. It's not that you're asking just like the universe, like what is going on. If I'm asking you what is going on, I want you to give me the answer. So yeah. All right. Different speech acts will require different things from the speaker, but they all involve an intention to produce certain effects and the hearer's recognition of that intention. We are now in a position to make our case against Gricean views. Our intuition is that the cunning citizen succeeds in asking a question about the library. Yeah, so the example from above is a person said something that means 2 different questions in 2 different languages. And so what did they actually ask? So their intuition is that the cunning citizen succeeds in asking a question about the library. This seems hard to deny. The addressee will simply answer his question, and they will not have misunderstood him if they did. Gricean analyses, however, predict otherwise because the cunning citizen does not intend to ask about the library in particular, since getting an answer to either question will do for his purposes, and since his idea has no idea which languages, and since he has no idea which language is spoken by his addressee. He also cannot intend the addressee to recognize the intention to ask about the library, since he does not have that intention, and recognition entails truth. So he lacks the response-related intention required by Grice's analysis, and he does not want his addressee to recognize the intentions he does have. Yeah, so this is trying to fool some. So what happened here is they're asking a question. They don't know what the language that a person is speaking, but they can understand based on their response something that they want to hear. So they're being purposefully obfuscating by using multiple complicated questions all at once. Complicated. All right. Our main argument relies on our intuitions about a case. Since intuitions can be fickle things, next we will show that the intuitions generalize to structurally similar non-linguistic cases, which we take to be good evidence that our intuitions track something real. Okay, the analogy with Bratman, 1984. Cunning Citizen bears a structural parallel to Bratman's 1984 classic video game example. Here, Jenny is playing a video game where the goal is to shoot one of 2 different targets. Jenny will win only if she shoots exactly one target, and she loses if she shoots both. However, shooting either target is difficult, so her best strategy is to fire at both targets simultaneously, hoping to only hit one of them. Unreal says, this is BS because Grice, from what I remember 25 years ago, specifically talks about how people can play games, deceive, etc. by playing in bad faith with conversational presuppositions. Okay. I mean, that may be straight up bullshit. Maybe they missed something. It's entirely possible. Hopefully they'll get to that in when they talk about arguments against their position later, because they said there was going to be some. So you may be 100% right that they missed something and that the reviewers missed something, or they're going to account for this later. All right. So suppose Jenny hits the leftmost target, winning the game. It seems she succeeded at hitting the leftmost target and that she did so intentionally. The same would be true if she successfully hit the rightmost target. All of this is also perfectly rational, but intending to hit both targets would be irrational since Jenny does not want to lose. She just intended to hit any one of them. You could definitely do a probabilistic. I have a probabilistic intention here. Like, I'm only going to hit one most likely, so I intend one or the other, but not both, with whatever percentage that would actually be, based on, how good you are at the game and, like, randomization. Like, what's your RNG at a video game? You can just shoot randomly, and so I'm going to shoot to hit one or two of them with whichever percentage it will hit. Like, so you could do a probabilistic thing here too. So I don't know if this actually makes sense. Now, I don't know if that works in Cunning Citizen, like where you're saying one question that has two meanings, but or one group of sounds that asks two questions. But like you could also do the meta level. Well, I'm going to shoot randomly because at both of them, because I intend to only hit one with the higher probability, because hitting both would be very unlikely. Okay. All right, so two analogies between Cunning Citizen and Bratman's case are relevant to our argument. First is that, just like Jenny does not intend to hit both targets on pain of irrationality, the citizen does not intend to ask both the question, where is access to the library, and the question, in what direction is the chapel. Asking both questions would mean speaking two different languages, and intending to do that in that situation would be irrational, since it would amount to endangering himself. Frank says, I would say she intends to hit 0 with one probability, 1 with another probability, and 2 with the third probability. Yeah, what I just said. Yeah. I think you said it better than I did, but like you got the point. Isn't this why we invented math, especially discrete math? No, this is why we invented word problems. But more seriously, the question here is about what we intend with language, not how we quantify it with math. So no, the question here is really, how do you communicate? What is going on when we communicate, when like asking a question or doing something? What do you intend to do? This is not a math question. Just isn't. Like, how do we describe what you are doing? Now, you could take the overly science approach and say, well, you have a certain chemistry that orients you in this way, but we don't have that full yet. So what we have to do is say, well, what do you think? What do you actually mean when you say this stuff? We have to look at the sort of the language still. We're not in the overly scientific world where we can just predict what we're going to do with science and math. Okay. So continuing. Moreover, it seems very plausible that he does not intend to ask either one of the two questions in particular, just like in Bratman's case. Jenny did not intend to hit either one of the two targets in particular, since any one will do. The second analogy is that, just like in Bratman's example, Jenny successfully hit one of the two video game targets. The Cunning Citizen will have asked one of the two questions, and if his audience is indeed a priest. Yeah. You can't mix in that type of math that doesn't get the attention. Yeah. Yep. If both the intention analogy and the action analogy are correct, yeah. So one is, what do you intend to hit, and what are you actually aiming at, I guess. Yeah. Well, what would you have asked? Yeah, what are you trying to do? Yep. Okay. Yeah. So DCI is making a joke. Adam tuned in. On my paper, I had an attentive question, mainly clarification, but I'm only going to address one. First question, so let's say a person leaving a building from the highest floor who is not an expert, having no other diagrams and wants to evacuate. They think the actual shortest route out of the building is the shortest route out of the building. The person notes it down and draws a diagram. Here the diagram contains a figure and an arrow pointing to the exit door. Worry. Well, how does it give them a perspective on the world that matches? You have to match up you have to orient your perspective in the way an expert does. So the idea that you're not the expert, though, so you've only oriented it the way you know how. You have not oriented it to anything in the world. This is the difficulty of the diagram has to line up with something in the world. And so this was at the very, very beginning. I asked, well, what is the form of the diagram? If it perfectly matches up with the world, then it's not a form of itself. And if it doesn't, but then it can't also be unique and something separate from the rest of the world. Otherwise, it won't have anything to do with the world. You need to figure out that you've got a problem here. You don't actually know what the form is because you don't know what the world looks like. And it's not a diagram of anything. You're just making stuff up. Then it's a fantasy. But yeah, so I don't think that's a worry at all. Lumpy, thank you for stopping by. Chemistry is a harsh mistress, but really old age is even worse. Yes. Yeah. The world necessarily has a shortest way out, though. Yes, but you don't know what that is. Like, you can write it down, but how would you know what the building is? You can just draw a picture, but, like, how would that actually get you out of the building? I mean, you're not the expert. That the world has one doesn't give you the perspective on what it actually is. So, how would the just knowing the fact that something is the case give you a perspective on how to use it to get out of the building? It's like, I know there's a way. I know that there's going to be a winning lotto number in the like Mega Millions next week. Can I just write it down and then I have like an instruction manual to win the Mega Lotto Millions? It's like, no. The expert perspective has to correlate to something in the world. Otherwise, it's you can make a diagram. It's just not a good diagram. Like, that's all it is. I mean, you'd be like, me out. Yes, it's a diagram. It's not a good diagram, though. I mean, if that's the question, then Frank actually brought this up earlier. I did not talk about good and bad diagrams. I was only, but like it doesn't actually matter for my discussion because defining the quality of the diagram wasn't what I was interested in. I was only interested in just describing what is a diagram, not whether it's actually very useful. So yeah. Okay. So if these analogies are correct, the cunning citizen asked a question about the library, even though they did not have the particular intention to produce in the audience the intention to answer that question, nor did he intend his audience to recognize an intention which he does not have. So cunningsism is a counterexample to Gricean theories of asking. For similar reasons, it raises a problem for Gricean theories of meaning. Importantly, the counterexample does not rely on the details of the case. Firstly, nothing depends on the special features of the speech act of asking. Similar cases can be constructed for any speech act, easily constructed. Well, thanks for the question, Adam. So the problem generalizes, I mean, to be fair to me, I had to go very fast past the problem. So just because of space, to get to the answer, I had to go very, very fast past the problem. And so, but it is a problem, I think. It's like you're asking why don't diagrams have easy forms? Like, they're just not the form themselves. And then I completely skipped good and bad diagrams. So, yeah. Okay. So the problem generalizes to Gricean analyses of all illocutionary acts. Yeah, so you could say one thing but mean multiple other things also, and not tell people, and have them take one of the answers, and then have you decide what you're going to do based on how they react to what you say. But you didn't mean any one of them in particular. You could say make a noise and just see how they reacted. Okay, nor does the story have to be all that convoluted. We might imagine a more realistic scenario in which a spy knows different codes and uses the same sequence of sounds to ask different questions depending on which code is known by the addressee. Finally, while in cunning citizen there are two possible languages for interpreting an utterance, the language of the priests and the language of the citizens, similar cases can be envisaged without this language feature. Consider a variant in which a speaker might utter, "Can you pass the salt?" Uncertain of whether the addressee will take them to have asked a question or to have made an order, with the intention to make either speech act depending on the speaker's take. Okay, yeah, so if I asked, "Can you pass the salt?" you might say, "Okay, yeah, I can." And the other one is, "Can you pass the salt?" Like, you better fucking pass the salt. So maybe that's not too bad, but do they come to the same thing? Not sure. In this case, like in cunning citizen, the speaker need not intend to perform either of the two speech acts in particular. Rather, it seems that the speaker means a question only conditionally on the addressee taking them to have asked a question, and means an order only conditionally on the addressee taking them to have issued an order. Okay, yeah, so if you have to wait to see how they react, that's kind of backwards. Either you're asking a question or you're issuing an order, but if you wait to see how they react, that has nothing to do with your intention. Okay. How could the Gricean reply to our style of counterexample? One first possible response is to contend that in cunning citizen, both questions are asked and meant. Yeah, so this is the both. So they got both. Okay. A second possible response is that neither question is asked. Yeah, so it's the both and neither. By exploiting the structural analogy with Bratman's example, we suggest that neither response is satisfactory. Okay, so they're going to say it doesn't matter. Now, I don't know if they're going to hit the probabilistic one, because they think both neither, but the probabilistic one might have a third, might be a little bit complicated, actually. Those things are hard to argue with. All right. Okay. Many questions asked. According to the first response, the cunning citizen asked and meant both questions. Where is access to the library, and in what direction is the chapel? The parallel with Bratman highlights why this response is not compelling. By the lights of a Gricean theory of meaning, for each question one means, one also intends the audience to recognize what kind of response one intended. But our citizen cannot want his addressee to recognize that he has the intention to ask both questions, since that would put them in position to figure out that he speaks two languages, and that is prohibited. Luke says, I think I'm on board with his objection so far. It's not clear to me intention matters. What matters more is the function expected response rather than the speaker's intention. Yeah, I mean, that's completely fair that you think these people have a point. Then Grice overstated what is needed for communication. Yeah. I mean, they might be right about this. I don't know enough Gricean theory to give a good response. Okay, but Unreal Brian did mention that Grice understood this sort of thing and maybe does have a response. So there are potential responses here that I don't know about. All right. Moreover, this style of response is particularly implausible in a variant of our case involving orders. Suppose the same sound expresses in two different languages two incompatible commands, such as the command to bring only a glass of champagne and to bring only a glass of water. Here it would be particularly implausible to contend that if one produced that sound with the intention to make either request depending on the language spoken by the addressee, one would thereby be making contradictory requests. Yeah. So if it's impossible that they understand both, you can say two contradictory things, but they will never understand the contradiction. Okay, that's interesting. Let the intention to phi be the particular intention to phi, and let the intention to both phi and psi be the conjunctive intention to phi and psi. Yeah, so you could do both at once, or you could do one or the other. Could the cunning citizen have the particular intention to ask about the library and to ask about the chapel without having the conjunctive intention to ask both questions? The answer is no if the principle known as agglomeration for intentions holds. Okay, so yeah, so there's some technical philosophy here. I don't know what this is. According to agglomeration, if S intends to phi and S intends to psi, then S is rationally required to have the conjunctive intention to both phi and psi. Since we have seen the cunning citizen cannot have the conjunctive intention, it follows by agglomeration he cannot have both particular intentions either. And of course, if he lacks either particular intention, considerations of symmetry compel us to say that he lacks the other as well. However, agglomeration for intentions is controversial, and for this reason it is unwise to rest our argument on it. Valueban, what's up? You call unnecessary nomenclature? Well, yeah, you could call that on all philosophy. But, you know, this is one of these... Damn, I'm losing my voice. I'm wondering if this is one of these... one of the reviewers brought this up. He's like, oh, did you talk about agglomeration? You should talk about agglomeration here. It's really important. And so they had to add it. I have no idea. So yeah. So look, you see this? There's a little 3 right here. And there's a footnote down here. And so they're referencing somebody else about agglomeration. So I wonder if someone would be like, you should go read this paper on agglomeration. It would be really helpful for your argument. So they threw a footnote in. But yeah. Alright, no matter, for our intuitions are on our side. We directly intuit that our speaker did not have the particular intention to ask about the library, nor the particular intention to ask about the chapel. Luke says, typical review process making the paper work. Plausible for sure. Yeah, worse. Yeah. Process making paper worse. Yeah, well, give people credit. People want to take their credit. For all we know, this was the person to be like, you didn't reference my paper. Reference my paper. All right. In this respect, our case is just like Bratman's. It is intuitive that Jenny does not have the particular intention to hit the leftmost target, nor the particular intention to hit the rightmost target. After all, shooting either target will do for Jenny's purpose. Likewise, it is intuitive, that the cunning citizen did not have either of the particular intentions, since asking either question will do for his purpose. No questions asked. According to a second response, no question was asked in Cunning Citizen. Since intuitively he did ask about the library, this response amounts to an error theory. Such an error theory comes with substantial cost. Yeah, so if they're saying they just made noises and didn't ask a question, then the other person is like in error for thinking that they heard a question. Even though you made all the sounds like it was a question, you were just uttering noises. You weren't actually trying to say the question. So then you're saying, well, they were in error and stuff like that. This is more insane philosophy, but it's okay. It is hard to deny that he succeeded in asking a question. After all, we can imagine the communicative exchange to continue successfully with the audience offering the required information. Yeah, like you make those sounds, someone's going to think you asked a question. Like it's nuts to think he didn't. Moreover, this response entails that certain successful communicative exchanges are not really cases of meaning. This consequence strikes us as implausible when the communicative exchange in question is intentional, as in the case of Cunning Citizen. Then this response amounts to denying that every case of intentional communication is a case of meaning, and thus to a substantial resizing of the purported scope of Gricean theories. Yeah, so if you're just always just like unga bunga making sounds, unga bunga blah 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 blah, and like people are responding to you, then there's no meaning anymore, and that's really weird. Okay. Comparisons. Our challenge to Gricean theories of meaning significantly differs from other challenges recently raised to them. Let us begin with Lepore and Stone's objection from malapropisms. Consider the utterance of I jeopardize you to handle my duties. Here the speaker intends to use jeopardize with its regular meaning, and thus in some sense intended to say something about jeopardizing, but they also intended to deputize the addressee. So they want to deputize them to handle my duties. And yet intuitively they only said something about jeopardizing, with the Gricean left to explain why one intention, to use jeopardize, matters, and the other one, deputize, does not. Yeah, so they wanted to do both, so that's weird. Our case differs from this challenge in some important ways. First, the problem in the case described of malapropism is which intention trumps which. In our case, instead of intuitively speakers lack the respective intentions. Second, malapropisms can be taken care of by simply requiring tight connections to the conventional meaning of terms, or to what the hearer takes that meaning to be. What gets said is that which is more closely related to the conventional meaning of the term uttered. This solution does not apply to Cunning Citizen, since both interpretations are the conventional meaning of the sentence uttered relative to the two different languages. A final point worth emphasizing is that malapropism cases, by definition, involve some error or confusion on the part of the speaker, whereas the Cunning Citizen is neither confused nor in error. Thus, our argument raises a different and perhaps more serious problem to the Gricean reductive program, since it shows that even speakers who are free from error can generate counterexamples to the analysis. Compare now our challenge to Buchanan 2010. Buchanan 2010 also objects to the Gricean claim that speaker must intend to communicate a particular proposition. At this level of generality, our challenge is similar. However, Buchanan's argument concerns, in particular, underspecification. He points out that, for example, in cases of quantifier domain restriction, for example, the bucket in the backyard next to the hot tub decorated with a pirate motif is empty, the speaker need not have in mind a particular choice of specification, let alone intend their audience to recognize their having meant any particular specification, and yet communication succeeds. By contrast, the point we are making with Cunning Citizen does not involve a lack of specificity in the context of the speaker's linguistic intention, although the bucket may well raise issues about specificity. Yeah. I'm sorry, this is getting in the weeds here. Indeed, our Cunning Citizen is very clear about what alternative meanings his utterance can be taken to have. So our discussion differs from Buchanan 2010 in that it shows the problem arises for Gricean theories of meaning even in cases which involve no underspecification. Okay. Possible revisions, and I think we're almost done here. All right, so we have to get to page 13. So no, we got 2 more pages. Can Gricean theories of meaning be revised so as to account for our cases without losing the spirit of their account? The simplest Gricean solution is to say that, although the cunning citizen does not have the conjunctive intention to ask both questions, nor each particular intention, he has a disjunctive intention, that is, the intention to either ask one question or the other, and the addressee must recognize one of the disjuncts. That means disjunct just means one of the other. But that seems insufficiently general. After all, could not one have a more complicated plan? Indeed, we could envisage increasingly more complicated cases that realize virtually any Boolean operation on intentions, not just disjunctions. For example, suppose there are 3 permitted languages, A, B, and C, while knowing both A and B and knowing both A and C are permitted, knowing both B and C is forbidden, and further suppose the speaker has an intention to be recognized as speaking C only if not recognized as also speaking B. Alright, so it's getting massively complex. Appealing to increasingly more complexly structured intentions to deal with increasingly complicated cases like this seems rather ad hoc. Yeah, so you can't just be like, alright, whatever the logic is, that's what they intended to do. Another amendment might be ad hoc, yeah. Well, you can't fix your theory of meaning just to correspond to any sort of logical complexity that you need to. You have to have a theory of meaning that has to generate logical complexity. You can't look at the logical complexity and say, well, that's what I'm talking about. You're not even sure what intention is anymore. Yeah, so, well, that's their point, Blob. The point is that you have like normal intentions, but you can also intend to do slightly more complicated things. And as soon as you make it a little bit more complicated, the Griceans have to basically adapt to that. And they're trying to say, well, if they have to always adapt to whatever complications you make, then it's ad hoc. It's doing whatever. If your counterexample is complicated, my response to it gets to be complicated. Not necessarily. Because, like, you can say, look, if they have to jump through hoops every time you jump through hoops, their point was to have a simple theory of meaning. And if they're not giving a simple theory of meaning anymore, then the fact that they have to jump through hoops is not good. So, like, because if I say, well, I can do anything you do, but I also claim to do it simply, but then I'm not doing it simply. It's bad. Oops, sorry, lad. Last added premise to my worry, so the person leaving the building leaves said building by following the actual shores route out of the building on first try. It's possible. Yeah, they could get lucky. So in that case, did the person have a meditative use of the form diagram to orient them out or to reach their goal despite the quality of the diagram? So they just by dumb luck turned out to be an expert. They guessed the building. So they already had the right intention, the right perspective in that case. So they were the expert at that point. Even though they didn't know it. So you could be an expert at something, just have natural talent at it, and then, interpret the world correctly in that domain. So I don't see how that's a problem either. So yeah. But I mean, they turned out to be an expert without knowing it. So you could imagine someone who was an expert, got bumped in the head and didn't realize they were an expert, and then did everything fine, but they already had the expert perspective, they just lost knowledge of it. So I don't see that as a problem. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, you can write down a bad diagram and then just go out of the building correctly. But then the diagram's still bad, but has nothing to do with it. Yeah, a non-intentional expert, exactly. So, yeah, so the problem here is if Grice is trying to give a non-complex theory of intention, like what I intend to say is what I want you to hear, but then like you're saying, well, I'm doing these massively complex intentions, then it's like, well, okay. Then I have to match my theory to what your logic is. That's weird, though. Frank says, if my simple rule is to add one thing to anything you give me a really complicated expression. My rule results in a very complicated expression. That's fair. Let's see. So what are they actually arguing here? La 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 la. So they want, yeah. So the Grice, okay. So that's fine, Frank. But that would again change the Gricean story, because then you need to have a relative theory. Given whatever your intentions are, I need to do something else. That's not what they said. So maybe the Gricean could do something like that, but that isn't what they said. And maybe you could say, well, it's not ad hoc. It's just, it would be very different from what they said initially. So then the criticism wouldn't be that it was ad hoc. It would just be rather sophisticated and different. So maybe they shouldn't have called it ad hoc if the Gricean goes that way, but there would be some other problem because they have deviated very far from where I think they started. So I still think there's a disconnect here, and maybe they have not described the problem that the Gricean has gotten themselves into, but like that's not terrible. Now, you might be right, Frank, that there is a way out of this that isn't that complicated. But again, I don't know Gricean theory enough to say if you were right or wrong about what you just said there. Like, would that actually work? Not sure if complication matters here. It's just a matter of valid counterexample. Well, if Frank came up with a good Gricean theory that made it really simple, it would then therefore save Grice. The problem is I am not in a position to tell if what Frank said actually is, works with Gricean theory. So if they have a counterexample, but so that's the problem here is I'm not an expert in this area. And so Luke, if these folks have a counterexample, but then Frank can make a little tweak and it's all good, it's well, I don't know. Yeah. Well, I think the paper sounds okay. We'll get to review it in a second. The question just is are they being fair? As far as I can tell, it looks like they're being fair. I don't know. We've already had Unreal Brian say that Grice has dealt with these sorts of questions before. I don't know what Grice said on the matter. And now you're saying, well, look, maybe there isn't. This is the wrong way to criticize what Grice did. And maybe that's right, too. That, these people have overstated their argument. I don't know. All right. So, here we go. Another amendment might be to allow Gricean theories to encompass conditional intentions. For example, in Cunning Citizen, the intention to ask about the library conditionally on the audience being a priest. All right, this is dumb, but all right. They're just trying to make it complex. More generally, one could take the view according to which a speaker's S means P by an utterance U only if they conditionally intend the following, given that some condition C is met. To produce a particular response R in an addressee A, for A to attribute an intention of content 1 to S, for R to be the result of A's attribution of 1 to S. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so if you are saying, I want these sorts of people, if it's this person, I want them to understand this, and if it's somebody else, I want them to understand something else. I mean, you could say, I have the intention that depending on the kind of person is, that they have a different sort of outcome. So on this view, our cunning system can meet both questions by virtue of having two different conditional intentions, for 2 no longer entails that both conditional intentions are to be recognized by the addressee. Rather, the intention attributed by the addressee is the unconditional intention 1 to ask about the library, which the citizen does not actually have. This constitutes an element of departure from classical Gricean theories. Yeah, see, this is the question. If you make one of these slightly more complicated theories, how far have you gotten away from Grice? For on this account, the intention that the hearer must attribute to the speaker is not the same as the intention that the speaker does have, since the former intentional is unconditional and the latter is conditional. What if the person they are asking the question to happens to be a person who also knows C and P? They might understand the totality of the intent, right? Yeah, but that's not the setup, so you can't go change the setup at this late date. You have to... They set it up this way because they could, plausibly say Grice would have to accept this setup, not the one where they would know the two different languages. Yeah, and the utterances are identical. Yeah. Yes, Luke. They're making the same sound and two different people have to understand it completely differently. Yeah, so this is, I think, related to what you just brought up. If you complicate, you're making conditional sort of relative on what the hearer hears, then they're saying it's farther away from the Gricean theories. Yeah, but it means that more informed hearer would understand the question perfectly. Gricean, right? Yes, I think so. Because they would understand... No, they might not. They would understand... They might be confused, is what it would be. And I don't know how Grice would handle, like, if you're asking an ambiguous question. So they would understand that, like, it could mean two things, but they would probably, since they couldn't assume that the other person had learned both languages, they would be confused as to what they were supposed to do, you know? Yeah. So the example collapses to just being an example where the hearer is ignorant. You have to stick with the example, because that's the example that they set up to work with the Gricean theory in the way it does. But like, yeah, if someone else was in this person's position, it would be a different example, but that's not a problem for this paper. Yeah. Yeah, so okay. But like, if you change the example, then it won't work. Yeah. I mean, but that's not these people's point. All right. So yeah. But yeah, if you make a relative one, as you were asking about earlier, they're saying then it's not Gricean. A further consequence of this revision is that we lose the classical Gricean thought that the addressee must recognize, not merely attribute, the relevant intention. After all, recognizing an intention entails knowing, or at least truly believing, that the speaker had the intention. And in cunning schism, we have an addressee attributing a full intention to the speaker when they only had a conditional intention. So this account also departs from standard Gricean formulations, in that it also it has to weaken the recognition requirement so as to allow that the audience's attribution of intention to be possibly false. You're not changing the example. They're only exploring two possible of their own example and ignoring the third. No, they set it up that this is the only person that understands both languages. They said there is no way that another person has understood both languages. So this is by fiat. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying this is what they declared. Yeah. Adam says, is this about speaker meaning versus literal meaning, or one of no, Frank, I think that if they wanted to allow the hearer to understand one or the other, they would say that. But it doesn't matter, I don't think. So wait, Adam says, is this about the speaker meaning versus literal meaning, or one of the Grice's maxims of effective communication, or about conversational? It's about conversational implicature. They don't say that. They just said it was illegal. They're assuming that the person hears one or the other. Let's go find it. All right. So we're at the. Well, let me get to. Yeah. So we're at the conclusion. Let me go find it. Blah blah blah. At the beginning. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, they're saying, since either one will have worked for his purpose, and since he didn't know what language he was speaking, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Luke. Their example requires allowing it, but it doesn't matter because they only are assuming that the person's going to interpret it in one way. Their example doesn't preclude it, but like if you do preclude it, it's fine. And if you allow it, then the person won't know what you're asking either because they won't know the thing. And so they'll have to answer in either way. And so they still won't get your full intention, and it won't be what you were actually asking. They'll have to pick one unless they'll just act confused. And so that would be a whole different can of worms. So they did say it was illegal, and I think they meant it to be where you're not going to run into anyone else that speaks it, but I don't see how this is actually going to ruin what they said, because the person you run into is going to, assume one or the other because they have to, I don't think they can preclude, because it would be the same thing as saying if you ask a question of someone incapable of understanding it. All right, so let's assume that the person does speak both languages. What would happen then? Would they know what your intention was? No, but they would assume, because it would be illegal to know both languages, only one of them, and then they would have to answer either whatever they were as a priest or a citizen. And so in the end, they would still assume one or the other. And so in that case, it would collapse to the original example, because they would have to assume the guise of one of those characters. So I don't see how this actually is a counterexample, because they would have to assume the guise of it. What's up, Chocolate? Luke says all you need is one counterexample to show not be. Yeah, this is fair. So the fact that there could be the person that also knows both languages doesn't really matter because all it has to be is just someone who didn't. Yeah. Yeah, I followed the LinkedIn paper. Turns out I know one of the authors. You know them. He was your TA at uni. This is an okay paper, really. It's like, good for that person. That's funny. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So I get your point, Frank, that like the person might get that something more was afoot if you allowed that there were more people that knew both languages. But the more likely situation is that even if they did, because it was illegal, they'd have to pretend to only know one, and then it collapses back to the original situation. That's really funny, Adam. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a good question, but I think, as Luke was saying, all it has to be is just in the one case where the person doesn't know both languages, then their example holds in that case, and you only need one counterexample. You don't need all of the counterexamples. Frank says, whatever Grice already said in response to asking a question, if someone who can't understand a question will apply here too. It's possible that the address you to understand the intent in full, just unlikely, but unlikely doesn't matter. Yeah, well, there could be multiple stuff. But all these people need is a little bit of leeway. They only need a little bit. So they only need the fact that maybe the person would be confused, or maybe they'd assume one language. And as long as they would assume one language, that's all these people need for the counterexample. And so that would make their counterexample go through. So, I mean, the likelihood, you're right, doesn't matter, but they only need their example in one instance, and they have that. So, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't matter. The probabilities don't matter here. They just need it just not to be certain. They just need it not to be 100% that they do understand both language and the full intention. They only need to have the question where they only need the doubt, really, where the person be like, oh, I don't know. And then like I have to decide because I don't want to be shown to be breaking the law. So, yeah. And that's enough for their counterexample, that there is doubt here. That the meaning, according to Grice, allows for doubt. And that's all that, like, they've done that. I think. Or at least the wrinkle you threw in still allows for the doubt to enter. So I think it's okay. All right, conclusion. Looking at it from far enough, the reader is likely to find that we have not argued against the core of the Gricean idea that meaning is something to be analyzed in terms of the speaker intending to have certain effects on the audience, and the audience figuring out something about the speaker's intention. Frank says, even though I don't know Grice at all, I'm certain he has some answer for a person asking a question, and an addressee misunderstanding a question, but still giving an answer. No, it's fine, Frank. You can keep asking. Yes, but the point is that the definition was too narrow. That no matter what Grice said originally, it's too narrow for this example. And so, yes, he probably has an example, something to do, but that's what they were just saying right here. This constitutes an element of departure from classical Gricean theories. That's all they wanted, as long as they forced Grice to change anything, or Gricean, because I don't think Grice is still around. Maybe he is. But like you can see, all they needed was one little instance of a doubt. That's it. It's not that you're wrong, it's that they're right in this case. Grice might be salvageable, but it would need work. That's all it is. In the setup, there's no misunderstanding. No, but Frank is trying to save Grice, and and it might be savable. I don't know. And they're even saying that we haven't gone against all the Gricean things, though. They're just saying we have opened up doubt here. We have, however, argued on the basis of intuitions that the particular kinds of intentions used in Gricean theories cannot account for cases like cunning citizen. These seem to be cases where the speaker's intention are more complicated than what Griceans suppose, and where the speaker specifically does not want those intentions to be recognized by the audience. Yeah, so this is it. If you're going to be a little bit more complicated, Grice also has to be a bit more complicated, but that means Grice has to do more work. That's all. Where does this leave Gricean views? We see three options. One is to reject the cases. We have argued briefly that there are costs associated with this strategy. The second option is to construe Gricean theories as functionalists, as claims about the proper function of meaning and of speech acts, while allowing that there are other ways to mean and to perform speech acts. The third option we've sketched in section 6, is to allow for more complicated intentions into the theory, and this is what Frank is saying. You could do this, allow for more complicated intentions theory, and to allow differences between what the speaker intended and what the audience is supposed to figure out. We think this is the more promising way forward. See that? They agree with you, Frank. You could fix it, but like they're saying, you have to do something. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Like these people, and now as always we get to review. No, this is good. We get to talk it out, Frank. So as always we get to review. If you thought it was a fun paper, you get to type in brain dance, and you can see the emotes in the chat now. You can copy and paste them. These are better TTV emotes, and spelling does count here, so you have to spell correctly. So if you thought it was fun, you use a brain dance. If you thought it was big claims that shriveled up, you give it grapes. You cannot tell if it's yay or meh. Well, it's up to you. Nog navel, navel gazing, only for academics. Ouroboros, Nagoro for deep ancient ideas. Nog scream for existential artistic drama. Nog turd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog knife for slicing and dicing arguments. And then we have the global vote yay, vote nay, and vote meh. So if you thought it was a meh thing, you give it a meh. So if Frank gave it a yay and a meh, that will, average it out. So if you use more than one emote, it does matter. Thank you for voting Luke, Frank, and Globus. These people, this was pretty competently done in my opinion. We had some disagreements. There's going to be some Gricean gripes about this. You've never seen a more naval paper. I've seen a more naval paper, but this is navally. I mean, this is for linguistics people, philosophy of language people, but yeah, this is a very philosophy paper. So, I'm going to agree. I'm going to have to give it a Nog naval. There you go. At least one of those. They did a good job, as Unreal Brian did not like it. They did a good job, I thought, in giving some examples. They weren't the worst examples. Yeah. So let me see. What am I going to give it? A naval. It was very. I'm going to give it a meh. A naval, a meh. But they had for this area of philosophy, they're also getting a brain dance, because this is very hard to write the priest and the language and this whole little fantasy setup. That was actually not terrible for this area of philosophy. Yeah. Seriously, thank you. This is all new for you. Oh, welcome in. Drop a follow if you haven't. Everyone in the chat. It's what I do here. This is Philosophy Roulette. This is the first time I'm reading the paper. I don't know what the hell is going on most of the time. I'm just trying to figure it out. And, we hash it out with chat. Frank has questions. I try to answer the questions. It turns out these people agreed with Frank. They think, what Frank is saying is the right thing, that the Gricean picture is correct in the abstract, but needs to be fixed up for more of the complicated stuff. It was fun, but not quite fun ideas. It was a fun exploration of something trivial. Yes. I mean, that's kind of, like I said, for this area, this was a fun paper. I don't expect a lot of people to love philosophy of language. I mean, it's just sort of one of the nerdiest of nerd philosophy areas, the philosopher's philosophy stuff. A lot of philosophy of language. So it's yeah. But, they're also going to get a Nog knife. They did a not a bad job on the argumentation. I thought they did a pretty good job with clear examples and their arguments against Grice. We did have some gripes about what exactly their arguments amounted to, but yeah, it was okay. Their argumentation was generally all right. All right. So yeah, this is analytic philosophy. For all those people that hate analytic philosophy, you probably hated this paper, and that's okay. Yeah, oh, that's good, Unreal. Yeah, so you gave it a, I didn't, it's not, it's disagreeing with Grice. If you are, like, that's okay. Now, it was really just sort of like, you're right, it's kind of a light paper. It doesn't have the substance of a turd. It just is sort of like, just the a whiff of a turd. Like, so, you know, that's alright. I get you. Not all the substance. You don't understand trying to grasp the analysis of the Batman argument, circular or not. Yeah. Not poo, yeah. Well, poot, oh wow, okay.